Good afternoon, Facebook. I guess while I have some downtime, one of my favorite pastimes is to gain acquired knowledge. And being that I have unfortunately neglected my back, I'm going to be out of commission for a day or two here. So I wanted to start with an author by the name of Ayn Rand. And Ayn Rand, I have a hard time reading her material because of the extensive vocabulary that she has. If you guys are looking to expand and broaden your mind, I would seriously advise you to pick up some Ayn Rand. And so I just want to share a bit of this book with you just to captivate your mind and to maybe light a fire in you. Okay, this book is called Capitalism, the Unknown Idea. It is written and constructed by Ayn Rand. This book is not a treatise of economics. It is a collection of essays on moral aspects of capitalism. Our approach can best be summarized by the statements in the first issue of the Objectivist newsletter, January 1962. Objectivism is a philosophical movement. Since politics is a branch of philosophy, objectivism advocates certain political principles, specifically those of laissez-faire, capitalism as the consequence and the ultimate practical application of its fundamental philosophical principles. It does not regard politics as a separate or primary goal, that is, as a goal that can be achieved without a wider ideological context. Politics is based on three other philosophical disciplines: metaphysics, epistemology, and ethics. On the these words in this book. I'll tell you what. You want to excel in life, challenge yourself with different literature. The Ori of man's nature and of man's relationship to existence. It is only on such a base that one can formulate a consistent political theory and achieve it in practice. Objectivists are not conservatives. We are radicals for capitalism. We are fighting for the philosophical base which capitalism did not have and without which it was doomed to perish. I want to stress that our primary interest is not politics or economics as such, but man's nature and man's relationship to existence. And that we advocate capitalism because it is the only system geared to the life of a rational being. So, in this respect, there is a fundamental difference between our approach and that of capitalism classical defenders and modern apologists, with very few exceptions. They are responsible by default for capitalism destruction. The default consisted of their inability or unwillingness to fight the battle where it had to be fought on moral philosophical grounds. No political economic system in history has ever proved its value so eloquently or has benefited mankind so greatly as capitalism, and none has ever been attacked so savagely, viciously, and blindly. The flood of misinformation, misrepresentation, dissertation, and outright falsehoods about capitalism is such that the young people of today have no idea and virtually no way of discovering any idea of its actual nature, while archaeologists are rummaging through the ruins of the millennia for scraps of pottery and bits of bones from which the reconstruction some information about prehistorical existences, the events of less than a century ago are hidden under a mound more impenetrable than the geological debris of winds, floods, and earthquakes. A mound of silence to obliterate the truth on such a large scale, to hide an open secret from the world, to hide without any power of censorship, yet without any significant sound of protest. The fact that an ideal social system had once been almost within men's reach cannot be done by any conspiracy of evildoers. It cannot be done except with the tacit compliance of those who know better. By their silence, by their evasion of the clash between capitalism and altruism, it is capitalism alleged champions who are responsible for the fact that capitalism is being destroyed without a hearing, without a trial, without any public knowledge of its principles, its nature, its history, or its morals meanings. It is being destroyed in the manner of a nightmare, lynching, as if a blind, desperate, crazed mob were burning a straw man, not knowing that the grotesquely deformed bundle of straw is hiding the living body of the ideal. The method of capitalism destruction rests on never letting the world discover what it is that is being destroyed, on never allowing it to be identified within the hearing of the young. The purpose of this book is to identify it. The guilt for the present state of the world rests on the shoulders of those who are over 40 years old today, with a very few exceptions, those who, when they spoke, said less than they knew and said it less clearly than the subject demanded. This book is addressed to the young, in years or in spirit, who are not afraid to know and are not ready to give up what they have to discover. What are all the efforts of the capitalism enemies are frantically aimed at hiding is the fact that capitalism is not merely the practical, but the only moral system in history. See Atlas Shrugged. The political aspects of Atlas Shrugged are not its theme. Its theme is primarily ethical, epistemological, the role of the mind in the man's existence, and politics. Necessarily is one of the themes, conquests. But the epistemological chaos of our age, fostered by modern philosophy, is such that many young readers find it difficult to translate abstractions into political principles and apply them to the evaluation of today's events. This present book may help them. It is a notification footnote to Atlas Shrugged. Since every political system rests on some theory of ethics, I suggest to those readers who are actually interested in understanding the nature of capitalism that they read first The Virtue of Selflessness, which is another, I believe, Ayn Rand book, and I have that being sent to me. A collection of essays on the objectivism of ethics, which is a necessary foundation for this present book. Since no political discussion can be meaningful or intelligible without a clear understanding of two crucial concepts, rights and government. Yet these are two most strenuous evaded in today's technique of obfuscation. I suggest that you begin this book by reading or rereading two essays from the earlier collection, which you will find here reprinted in the appendix, Man's Rights and the Nature of Government. Most of the essays in this book appeared originally in the Objective newsletter, now in a magazine format. The Objectivist, others are based on lectures or papers, as indicated some of the essays cover. In brief summary, the answer to the most widely spread fallacies about the economics of capitalism. These essays appeared in the intellectual ammunition department of the Objective newsletter and were written in answer to questions from our readers. Those who are interested in studying political economy will find in the appendix a recommended bibliologically on the subject, bibliography on the subject. Now a word about the contributors to this book. Robert Henson is presently completing his doctorate in the history at Columbia University and is teaching in Columbia Grad School of Business. Alan Greenspan is president of Townsend Greenspan and Co. Inc., Economic Consultants, New York, July 1966. P.S. Nathaniel Branden is no longer associated with me with my philosophy of the objectivist, New York, November 1970. What is capitalism? Theory and history. The disintegration of the philosophy in the 19th century and its collapse in the 20th have led to the similar through much slower and less obvious process in the course of modern science. Today's frantic development in the field of technology has a quality reminiscent of the days preceding the economic crash of 1929. Writing on the monument of the past, of the unacknowledged remnants of the Aristoteles, of the facts that its theoretical amount is long since overdrawn, that in the field of the scientific theory, unable to integrate or interpret their own data, scientists are abetting the resurgence of a primitive mysticism in the humanities. However, the crash is past. The depression has set in, and the collapse of science is all but complete. The clearest evidence of it may be seen in such compartmentally young sciences as psychology and political economy. In psychology, one may observe the attempt to study human behavior without reference to the fact that man is conscious. In political economy, one may observe the attempt to study and to deceive social systems without reference to man. It is philosophy that defines and establishes the epistemological criteria to guide human knowledge in general and specific science in particular. Political economy came into prominence in the 19th century. In the era of the philosophy's post-Katrina disintegration, and no one rose to check its premise or to challenge its base. Implicity, uncritically, and by default, political economy accepted as its axiomus the fundamental tenet of collectivism. Political economists, including the advocates of capitalism, define their science as the study of the management of, or direction, or organization, or manipulation of the communities, or a nation's resources. The nature of these resources was not defined. Their communal ownership was taken for granted, and the goal of political economy was assumed to be the study of how to utilize these resources for the common good. The fact that the principal resource involved was man himself, that he was an entity of a specific nature with specific capacity and requirements, was given the most superficial attention, if any. Man was regarded simply as one of the factors of production, along with land, forests, and ore mines, as well as of the less significant factors, since more study was devoted to the influence and quality of these others than his role or quality. Political economy was, in effect, a science starting in midstream. It observed that men were producing and trading. It took for granted that they had always done so and always would. It accepted this fact as the given, requiring no further consideration, and it addressed itself to the problem of how to devise the best way for the community to dispose of human effort. There are many reasons for this tribal view of man. The morality of altruism was one. The growing dominance of political statism among the intellectuals of the 19th century was another. Philosophically, the main reason was the soul body dichotomy permeating European culture. Material production was regarded as a demeaning task of a lower order, unrelated to the concerns of man's intellect, a task assigned to slaves or serfs. Since the beginning of the record of history, the institution of serfdom had lasted, in one form or another, till well into the 19th century. It was abolished politically only by the advent of capitalism, politically but not intellectually. The concept of man as a free, independent individual was profoundly alien to the cultures of Europe. It was a tribal culture down to its roots. In Europe thinking, the tribe was the entity, the unit. The man was only one of its expendable cells. This applied to the rulers and serfs alike. The rulers were believed to hold their privileges only by virtue of the services they rendered to the tribe. Services regarded as of a noble order, namely armed force or military defense. But a nobleman was a nobleman was a much chattel of the tribe as a serf. His life and property belonged to the king. It must be remembered that the intuition of private property, in the full legal meaning of the term, was brought into existence only by capitalism. In the pre-capitalism eras, private property existed de facto, but not de jure, i.e., by custom and sufferance, not by right or by law. In law and in principle, all property belonged to the head of the tribe, the king, and was held only by his permission, which could be revoked at any time, at his pleasure. The king could and did expatriate the estate of recalcitrant noblemen throughout the course of Europe's history. The American philosophy of rights of man was never grasped fully by European intellectuals. Europe's predominant idea of emancipation consisted of changing the concept of man as a slave of the absolute state embodied by a king, to the concept of a man as a slave of the absolute state embodied by the people, i.e., switching from slavery to a tribal chief and into slavery to the tribe. A non-tribal view of existence could not penetrate the mentalities that regarded the privilege of ruling materials produced by physical force as a badge of nobility. Thus, Europe's thinkers did not notice the fact that during the 19th century, the galley slaves had been replaced by the inventors of steamboats, and the village blacksmith by the owners of blast furnace. And they went on thinking in such terms, such contradictions in terms as wage slavery or the antisocial selflessness of industrialists who take so much from society without giving anything in return. On the unchallenged axiom that wealth is an anonymous social tribal product, the notion has not been challenged to this day. It represents the implicit assumptions and the basis of a contemporary political economy. As an example of this view and its consequences, I shall cite the article on capitalism in the Encyclopedia Britannica. The article gives no definition of its subject. It opens as follows: capitalism, a term used to denote the economic system that has been dominated in the Western world since the breakup of the federalism. Fundamental to any system called capitalism and the relation between private owners of non-personal means of production, land, mines, industrial plants, etc., collectively known as capital. Italics mine, okay. And free but capitalist workers who sell their labor service to employers. The resulting wage bargains determine the proportion in which the total product of society will be shared between the classes of laborers and the classes of capitalist entrepreneurs. I quote from Galt's speech in Atlas Shrugged, from a passage describing the tenets of collectivism. An industrialist blank out, there is no such person. A factory is a natural resource, like a tree, a rock, or a mud puddle. The success of capitalism is explained by the Britannica as follows: productive use of the social surplus was a special virtue that enabled capitalism to outstrip all prior economic systems. Instead of building pyramids and eco-theodals, those in command of the social surplus chose to invest in ships, warehouses, raw materials, finished goods, and other material forms of wealth. The social surplus was thus converted into enlarged productive capacity. This is said about a time when Europe's population subsisted in such poverty that child mortality approached 50%, and mortality approached 50%, and periodic famines wiped out the surplus population, which the pre-capitalist economies were unable to feed, yet making no distinction between tax expropriated and industrial produced wealth. The Britannica asserts that it was the surplus wealth of that time that the early capitalists commanded and chose to invest. And this investment was the cause of the stupendous prosperity of the age that followed. What is a social surplus? The article gives no definition of explanation. A surplus presupposes a norm. If subsistence on a chronic starvation level is above the implied norm, what is that norm? The article does not answer. There is, of course, no such thing as a social surplus. All wealth is produced by somebody and belongs to somebody, and the special virtue that enabled capitalism to outstrip all prior economic systems was freedom, a concept eloquently absent from the Britannica's account, which led not to the expropriation, but to the creation of wealth. I shall have more to say later about the disgraceful article, disgraceful on many counts, not the least of which is scholarship. At this point, I quoted it only as a succinct example of the tribal premise that underlies today's political economy. That premise is shared by the enemies and the champions of capitalism alike. It provides the former with a certain inner consistency and disarms the latter by a subtle yet devastating aura of moral hypocrisy, as witness their attempts to justify capitalism on the grounds of the common good, or services to the consumer, or the best allocation of resources. Whose resources? If capitalism is to be understood, it is this tribal premises that has to be checked and challenged. Mankind is not an entity, an organism, or a coral bush. The entity involved in production and trade is man. It is with the study of man, not of the loose aggregate known as a community, that any science of the humanity has to begin. This issue represents one of the epistemological differences. Some of these words are getting me. Sorry, guys. Differences between the humanities and the physical sciences. One of the causes of the former's well-earned inferiority complex in regards to the latter. A physical science would not permit itself, not yet at least, to ignore or bypass the nature of its subjects. Such an attempt would mean a science of astronomy that gazed at the sky but refused to study individual stars, planets, and satellites. Or a science of medicine that studied diseases without any knowledge of criterion of health, and took as his basis subject of study a hospital as a whole, never focusing on individual patients. A great deal may be learned about society by studying man, but this process cannot be reversed. Nothing can be learned about man by studying society. By studying the interrelationship of entities, one has never identified or defined yet that it is methodology adopted by most political economists. Their attitude, in effect, amounts to the unstated, implicit postulate man is that which fits economic equations. Since he obviously does not, this leads to the curious fact that in spite of the particular nature of their science, political economists are oddly unable to relate their abstractions to the concerts of actual existence. It leads also to the baffling sort of double standard or double perspectives in their way of viewing men and events. If they observe a shoemaker, they find no difficulty in concluding that he is working in order to make a living. But as a political economist on the tribal premises, they declare that his purpose and duty is to provide to provide society with shoes. If they observe a panhandler on a street corner, he becomes a sovereign consumer. If they hear the communist doctrine that all property should belong to the state, they reject it empathetically and feel sincerely that they would fight communism to the death. But in political economy, they speak of the government duties to effect a fair and redistribution of wealth. And they speak of business as the best, most efficient trustees of the nation's natural resources. This is what a basic premise and philosophical negligence will do. This is what the tribal premise has done. To reject that premise and begin at the beginning in one's approach to political economy and to the evolution of various social systems, one must begin by identifying man's nature, i.e., those essential characteristics which distinguish him from all other living species. Man's essential characteristics is his rational faculty. Man's mind is his basic means of survival, his only means of gaining knowledge. Man cannot survive as animals do by the guidance of mere percepts. He cannot provide for his simplest physical needs without a process of thought. He needs a process of thought to discover how to plant and grow his own food, or how to make weapons and for hunting. His precepts might lead him to a cave if one is available. But to build the simplest shelter, he needs a process of thought. No percepts and no instincts will tell him how to light a fire, how to weave cloth, how to forge tools, how to make a wheel, how to make an airplane, how to perform an appendectomy, how to produce an electrical light bubble or an electronic tube or a cyclotron or a box of matches. Yet his life depends on such knowledge, and only a volitional act of his consciousness, a process of thought, can provide it. A process of thought is an enormously complex process of identification and interrogation, which only an individual mind can perform. There is no such thing as a collective brain. Men can learn from one another, but learning requires a process of thought on the part of every individual student. Men can cooperate in the discovery of new knowledge, but such cooperation requires the independent exercise of his rational faculty by every individual scientist. Man is the only living species that can transmit and expand his store of knowledge from generation to generation, but such transmission requires a process of thought on the part of the individual recipients, as witness the breakdowns of civilization, the dark ages in the history of mankind's progress, when the accumulated knowledge of centuries vanished from the lives of men who were unable, unwilling, and unforbidden to think. In order to sustain its life, every living species has to follow a certain course of action required by its nature. The action required to sustain human life is primarily intellectually. Everything man needs has to be discovered by his mind and produced by his efforts. Production is the application of reason to the problem of survival. If some men do not choose to think, they can survive only by imitating and repeating a routine of work discovered by others. But those others had to discover it, or none would have survived. If some men do not choose to think or to work, they can survive temporarily only by looting the goods produced by others. But those others had to produce them, or none would have survived, regardless of what choice is made. In this issue, by any irrational or evil course they may choose to pursue, the fact remains that reason is man's means of survival, and that men prosper or fail, survival or perish in proper proportion to the degree of their rationality. Proprieties of the individual, since the choice to exercise his rational faculty or not depends on the individual man's survival, requires that those who think be free of the interference of those who do not. Since men are neither omniscient nor infallible, they must be free to agree or disagree, to cooperate or to pursue their own their own independent course, each according to his own rational judgment. Freedom is the fundamental requirement of man's mind. A rational mind does not work under compulsion. It does not subordinate its grasp of reality to anyone's orders, directives or controls. It does not sacrifice its knowledge, its views of the truth to anyone's opinions, threats, wishes, plans, or welfare. Such a mind may be hampered by others. It may be silenced, prescribed, imposed upon, imprisoned, or destroyed. It cannot be forced at a gun. It cannot be forced. A gun is not an argument. An symbol of this attitude is Galileo. It is from the work and the inviolation integrity of such minds, from the intransient innovators, that all of mankind's knowledge and achievements have come. See the fountainhead. It is to such minds that mankind owes its survival. See Atlas Shrugged. The same principles apply to all men, on every level of ability and ambition. To the extent that a man is guided by his rational judgment, he acts in accordance with the requirements of his nature, and to the extent succeeds in achieving a human form of survival and well-being. To the extent that he acts irrationally, he acts as his own destroyer. The social recognition of man's rational nature, of the connection between his survival and his use of reason, is the concept of individual rights. I shall remind you that rights are a moral principle, defining and sanctioning a man's freedom of action in a social context, that they are derived from man's nature as a rational being and represent a necessary condition of his particular mode of survival. I shall remind you also that the right to life is the source of all rights, including the right to property. In regards to political economy, this last requires special emphasis. Man has to work and produce in order to support his life. He has to support his life by his own dispose of the product of his effort. He cannot dispose of his effort if he cannot dispose of his effort. He cannot dispose of his life without property rights. No other rights can be practiced. Now, bearing these facts in mind, consider the question of what social system is appropriate to man. A social system is a set of moral, political, economic principles embodied in a society's laws, institutions, and government, which determines the relationship, the terms of association among the men living in a given geographical area. It is obvious that these terms and relationships depend on an identification of man's nature, that they would be different if they pertain to a society. For a fuller discussion of rights, I refer to you my articles, Man's Rights, in the appendix of Rational Beings, or to a Colony of Ants. It is obvious that they will be radically different if men deal with one another as free, independent individuals. On the premise that every man is an end in himself, or as a member of a pack, each regarding the other as the means to his ends and to the ends of the pack as a whole. There are only two fundamental questions, or two aspects of the same question, that determine the nature of any social system. Does a social system recognize individual rights? And does a social system ban physical force from human relationships? The answer to the second question is the practical implementation of the answer to the first. Is a man a sovereign individual who owns his person, his mind, his life, his work, and its products? Or is he the property of the tribe, the state, the society, the collective, that may dispose of him in any way it pleases, that may dictate his convictions, prescribe the course of his life, control his work and exploration, his products? Does man have the right to exist for his own sake, or is he born in bondage as an indentured servant who must keep buying his life by serving the tribe but can never acquire it free and clear? This is the first question to answer. The rest is consequences and practical implementations. The basic issue is only, is man free? In mankind history, capitalism is the only system that answers yes. Capitalism is a social system based on the recognition of individual rights, including property rights, in which all property is privately owned in the private sector on the private side. The recognition of individual rights entails the banishment of physical force from human relationships. Basically, rights can be violated only by means of force. In a capitalist society, no man or group may initiate the use of physical force against others. The only function of the government in such a society is the task of protecting man's rights, i.e., the task of protecting him from physical forces. The government acts as the agent of man's rights of self-defense and may use force only in relation and only against those who initiate its use. Thus, the government is the means of placing the retaliatory use of force under objective control. It is the basis, metaphysical fact of man's nature. The connection between his survival and his use of reason that capitalism recognizes and protects. In a capitalist society, all human relationships are voluntary. Men are free to cooperate or not, to deal with one another or not, as their own individual judgments, convictions, and interests dictate. They can deal with one another only in terms of and by means of reason, i.e., by means of decisions, persuasion, and contractual agreements, by voluntary choice to mutual benefits. So again, we're touching base on contracts, ladies and gentlemen. And what do you have to have? To have a contract, you have to have a mutually beneficial binding agreement, ladies and gentlemen. This book is very powerful, and I hope you guys will run out there and buy it. The right to agree with others is not a problem in any society. It is the right to disagree that is crucial. It is the intuition of private property and that protects and implements the right to disagree, and thus keeps the road open to man's most valuable attributes, valuable personally, socially, and objectively, the creative mind. This is the cardinal difference between capitalism and collectivism. The power that determines the establishment, the changes, the evolution, and the destruction of social systems is philosophy. The role of chance, accidents, or traditions in this context is the same as their role in the life of an individual. Their power stand in inverse ratio to the power of the culture or of a culture or an individual philosophical equivalent, and grows as philosophy collapses. It is therefore by reference to philosophy that the character of a social system has to be defined and evaluated. Corresponding to the four branches of philosophy, the four keystones of capitalism are: metaphysically, the requirements of a man's nature and survival; epistemologically, reason; ethically, individual rights; politically, freedom. This, in substance, is the base of the proper approach to political economy and to an understanding of capitalism, not the tribal premise inherited from prehistorical traditions. The practical justification of capitalism does not lie in the collectivism claim that it affects the best allocation of national resources. Man is not a national resource, and neither is his mind. And without the collective power of man and man's intelligence, raw materials remain just so many useless raw materials. The moral justification of capitalism does not lie in the altruistic claim that it represents the best way to achieve the common good. It is true that capitalism does, if that catchphrase has any meaning, but this is merely a secondary consequence. The moral justification of capitalism lies in the fact that it is the only system consistent with man's rational nature, that it protects man's survival qua man, and that its ruling principle is justice. Every social system is based explicitly or implicitly on some theory of ethics. The tribal notion of the common good has served as the moral justification of most social systems and of all tyrannies in history. The degree of a society's enslavement or freedom corresponded to the degree to which the tribal slogan was invoked or ignored. The common good or the public interest is